You ever sit in a crowded place? Doesn't matter where, could be a coffee shop at 7 a.m., could be a bus packed with people holding on to the same metal bar, and realize something feels off, even though everything looks normal on the surface. Men in clean shirts, some checking emails, some scrolling through news they won't remember in 10 minutes, some staring blankly like their mind is still back in bed. And if you listen closely, not to what they say, but to what their lives are saying, there's a pattern. A quiet one. Nobody announces it, nobody posts about it, but it's there. Most of them are running hard, and somehow not getting anywhere that matters. See, we grew up hearing a simple rule: work hard, keep your head down, things will work out. Sounds fair, sounds honest, like something your father would say while fixing something in the house, or your teacher would repeat before exams. And for a while, it even looks true. You study, you pass. You show up early, you don't get fired. You follow instructions, you stay safe. But somewhere between your first paycheck and your 5th year of doing the same routine, something starts to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. It's more like a slow leak you don't notice until the room feels colder. You're doing everything right, and yet, nothing is really changing. Bills still come, faster actually. Responsibilities stack like dishes in a sink nobody wants to deal with. Your energy drains quicker than it used to, but your results don't grow at the same speed. And that's when the question creeps in, usually late at night when the noise dies down. Why does it feel like I'm stuck, even though I'm trying this hard? Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because the answer isn't something people like to hear. It's not luck, it's not timing, and it's not that the world is completely against you. The truth is quieter than that, and sharper. Most men are busy, but not effective. They confuse movement with progress. Like running on a treadmill, sweat everywhere, heart pounding, but the scenery never changes. You can spend 10 hours working, answering messages, attending meetings, solving small problems, and still be in the exact same place a year later. Because effort, by itself, doesn't build anything. Effort without direction just burns you out. Effort without skill, that's where it gets dangerous. Because it tricks you. It makes you feel productive while quietly keeping you replaceable. Think about it. How many people do you know who talk a lot, but when they speak, nothing really lands? Words come out, sentences form, but they don't move anyone. No one follows, no one remembers. It's like throwing paper planes into the wind and hoping one of them reaches somewhere important. Or take another example. Guys who work non-stop, chasing overtime, picking up extra shifts, thinking more hours will fix everything. But the paycheck increases just enough to keep them going, never enough to free them. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. You pour more in, but it never stays. And the scary part? Society kind of rewards this behavior in the short term. People will call you hardworking, reliable, dedicated. You might even feel proud of that. But behind those labels, there's a quiet truth nobody says out loud. Being dependable at the wrong level just keeps you in the same position longer. You become the guy they can't promote, because you're too useful where you are. And then there's the mental side of it, the part that doesn't show up on paper, the constant noise in your head, decisions you avoid because you're not sure how to think them through, opportunities you miss because you don't recognize them when they show up, conversations you stay quiet in because you're not confident in what you're saying. That's not about effort, that's about skill, the way you think, the way you process information, the way you respond under pressure. Nobody teaches you this clearly when you're young. They teach you what to do, not how to think. So you grow up following instructions, waiting for the next step to be handed to you. And when it's not, you stall, you hesitate, you second guess. Meanwhile, someone else, maybe less hardworking, maybe less obedient, steps in and takes that space. Not because they deserve it more, but because they're equipped for it. That's the word people avoid. Equipped. Life isn't just about how much you can carry, it's about whether you have the right tools in your hands. Imagine showing up to build a house with nothing but your bare hands. You can work all day, you can bleed, sweat, push yourself to the limit. But at the end of it, what do you really have? Now put another man next to you. He has tools, not magical ones, just the right ones. A hammer, a plan, some understanding of how things fit together. He works less hours, takes breaks, doesn't look as exhausted. But slowly, piece by piece, something starts to stand where he's working. walls, structure, progress you can actually see. That difference right there, that's not luck, that's skill. And in today's world, the gap between those two men is getting wider, not smaller. Because now, it's not just about physical tools, it's about invisible ones. The ability to communicate clearly, to build relationships that actually open doors, to understand how money flows instead of just earning it, to use technology not as entertainment, but as leverage, to make decisions without freezing or rushing blindly. These things don't look impressive at first glance. They're not flashy. You can't always show them off, but they compound, quietly, like interest in a bank account nobody checks daily. And one day, the difference becomes obvious. One man is still chasing stability, the other is choosing direction. And if you're honest, really honest, you've probably felt this gap yourself at some point. Maybe in a meeting where you had an idea but couldn't express it properly. Maybe when you saw someone else get an opportunity and thought, I could have done that, but deep down knew you weren't ready. Maybe when your bank balance didn't match the effort you've been putting in for years. These moments, they sting. Not because they're unfair, but because they reveal something. They show you the distance between where you are and what you're capable of. And most people react the same way. They ignore it, distract themselves, blame circumstances, tell themselves it'll work out eventually. But time doesn't fix this. Time just exposes it more clearly. Because the world is changing fast, faster than most people are comfortable admitting. Jobs evolve, tools replace manual effort, attention spans shrink, competition increases, not just from people around you, but from people across the world you'll never meet. And in that kind of environment, working hard is no longer a differentiator. It's the baseline. Everyone is working hard. Everyone is busy. So the real question becomes, what makes you different? What makes you valuable in a way that can't be easily replaced? That's where skills come in. Not random skills, not things you learn just to feel productive. High-value skills, the kind that change how you operate, not just what you do. The kind that turn effort into results. The kind that make people stop, listen, and take you seriously. Because at the end of the day, the market, the real world, doesn't reward intentions. It rewards outcomes. It doesn't care how tired you are, how long you worked, or how hard you tried. It responds to value, to clarity, to impact. And that might sound harsh, maybe even unfair, but there's something freeing about it too. Because once you understand this, you stop waiting. You stop hoping things will magically align. You start looking at yourself differently, not as someone stuck in a situation, but as someone who can upgrade the way they move through it. And that shift, that quiet realization, is where everything begins to change. There was this man, not someone extraordinary if you saw him in passing, not the kind of person people turn their heads to look at, just one of those faces that blend into the morning crowd. Mid-30s, maybe a little older if you caught him on a tired day. He lived in a small apartment that always felt slightly too quiet in the evenings. The kind of place where the refrigerator hum becomes louder after 10 p.m. His alarm rang at 6:15 every morning, the same default tone he never bothered to change. And most days he didn't wake up immediately. His hand would slide across the bedside table, knock over a half-empty glass of water once or twice, and finally silence the sound like he was negotiating with it. No dramatic start to the day. No motivation speech in the mirror. Just a slow, reluctant agreement to get up and do it all again. He would sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was waiting for something inside him to switch on, but it rarely did. Still, routine is a powerful thing. It carries you even when your mind doesn't. So he'd stand up, stretch his back just enough to shake off the stiffness, and walk to the kitchen. Instant coffee, always instant. 2 spoons, sometimes 3 if he felt like he didn't sleep enough, which was most days. He didn't even wait for it to dissolve fully. Just stirred it quickly, watched the powder swirl like it was trying to escape, and drank it while it was still too hot. That was breakfast. Quick, functional, no thought behind it. By 6:45, he was already checking his phone. Emails first, then messages, then whatever notifications came in overnight. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just reacting, replying to things that felt urgent, even if they weren't important. That's how his day usually began, responding, not deciding. By the time he stepped out of the apartment, the city was already moving. Motorbikes cutting through traffic like water finding cracks. People balancing breakfast in one hand and their phones in the other. street vendors setting up with that quiet efficiency that comes from doing the same thing for years. He joined that flow without thinking. Same route, same turns, same red lights where he would stop, glance around, and see the same expressions on other faces. Focused, tired, somewhere in between. Nobody really present, just passing through the morning like it was something to get over with. His office wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes on a normal day, longer if traffic decided to pile up for no clear reason. The building itself looked modern enough. Glass panels, clean lobby, security guard who nodded but never spoke. Inside, everything felt structured, predictable. Rows of desks, screens lighting up one by one, the low hum of air conditioning that never quite matched the outside temperature. He had his spot, third row, near the window, but not close enough to actually enjoy the view. He sat down, placed his bag carefully under the desk, opened his laptop, and just like that, the day officially started. Tasks came in fast. Emails, assignments, small requests that sounded simple but stacked quickly. He handled them the way he always did, methodically, without questioning too much. If something needed to be done, he did it. If someone asked, he responded. Reliable. That's what people would call him if you asked around. The kind of guy you don't worry about because you know he'll get things done. And for a while, that felt like enough. Meetings were where things got noticeable, though he wouldn't admit it out loud. He spoke. Often, actually. He wasn't shy, but there was something about the way he spoke that didn't quite land. His sentences were long, sometimes circling around the point instead of hitting it directly. He used safe words, familiar phrases, things he'd heard others say. It sounded fine on the surface, but it didn't carry weight. You could see it in the room, the slight shift of attention, people nodding politely but already thinking about something else. Nobody challenged him. Nobody built on his ideas either. It was like his words filled the space for a moment, then disappeared without leaving anything behind. And that's a strange feeling, you know, talking, but not being heard, being present, but not really influencing anything. Over time, you start to notice it in small ways. Decisions being made after the meeting ends, not during. Conversations happening without you, even when you're sitting right there. You're included, but not essential. Lunch breaks were usually quick. Sometimes he ate with colleagues, sometimes alone. Conversations stayed on the surface, workload, deadlines, maybe a complaint about management, maybe a joke that lasted just long enough to make the silence less obvious. Nobody really talked about direction, about where they were going. It was more about getting through the week, getting to Friday, and then doing it all over again. He told himself this was normal, this was adulthood, stability over everything. But there were moments, small ones, that broke that illusion. Like when a new guy joined the team, younger, less experienced, at least on paper. At first, nobody paid much attention, just another hire. But within weeks, things shifted. That guy didn't talk more. In fact, he spoke less. But when he did, people listened. His ideas were clear, simple, direct. He didn't try to sound impressive. He just made things make sense. And somehow, that stood out more than all the effort others were putting in. Or when a project came up, and instead of assigning it based on seniority, management picked someone else, not him. Even though he had been there longer, even though he knew the system inside out. The explanation was vague. Fit, initiative, fresh perspective. Words that sound reasonable but don't really explain anything when you're on the receiving end. He didn't complain. That wasn't his style. He just nodded, accepted it, went back to his desk. But something stayed with him after that. A quiet question he couldn't shake off. What am I missing? Because from where he stood, he was doing everything right. Showing up, working hard, being dependable. And yet, it felt like he was running in place while others were somehow moving forward. Evenings didn't bring much clarity either. He'd get home, drop his keys on the table, sit down for a bit longer than he planned. Sometimes he turned on the TV just for background noise. Sometimes he scrolled through his phone, watching other people's lives unfold in short clips, success stories, advice, motivation that sounded good in the moment but faded quickly after. Dinner was simple, whatever was easy, something he didn't have to think about too much. And then came that part of the night where everything slowed down. No more notifications, no more tasks, just him and his thoughts. That's when it got a little uncomfortable. Not overwhelming, just honest. He'd think about the day, the conversations, the moments where he felt slightly out of place, the opportunities that passed by without him even realizing they were there. And he'd tell himself the same thing most people do. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow came, and it looked a lot like today. Same routine, same effort, same results. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Nothing dramatic changed. And that's the tricky part. It wasn't failure, not in a way that forces you to react. It was stability, just enough progress to keep him going, just enough comfort to prevent him from questioning things too deeply. But underneath that surface, something was slowly building. Not frustration exactly, more like awareness. The kind that grows quietly until you can't ignore it anymore. He started noticing patterns, not just in himself, but in others too. The people who moved forward weren't necessarily the ones working the longest hours. They weren't always the most experienced either, but they had something in common, something hard to describe at first. They knew how to communicate their ideas in a way that made sense. They built connections that went beyond small talk. They understood tools, systems, money, things he had always treated as background noise. And most importantly, they made decisions. Not perfect ones, but clear ones. While he was still reacting, they were choosing. That difference. It seems small when you look at it from a distance, but up close, day after day, it changes everything. And slowly, without any big moment or dramatic turning point, he started to realize something that felt both simple and heavy at the same time. He wasn't stuck because he wasn't trying hard enough. He was stuck because he had been trying in the same way for too long. The shift didn't come like a lightning strike, no sudden wake-up call, no dramatic moment where everything stopped and made sense. It came quietly, almost in a way that could be missed if you weren't paying attention. Just a regular Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels like it's been copied and pasted from every other day before it. The office lights were the same pale white. The air still carried that faint mix of coffee and recycled air, and people were moving through tasks like they always did, efficient, distracted, predictable. He was sitting at his desk, halfway through replying to an email he had already rewritten twice, when he noticed something small. Not important on the surface, but it stayed. A conversation happening 2 desks away. The newer guy, the one who had been there only a few months, was explaining something to a manager. No big presentation, no slides, no formal setup. Just standing there, one hand in his pocket, speaking in a calm, steady way. And what caught his attention wasn't what was being said. It was how it was being received. The manager wasn't interrupting, wasn't checking their phone, wasn't rushing. They were listening, actually listening. And every now and then, they nodded. Not the polite kind of nod you give to end a conversation, but the kind that says, "I see your point." That moment passed quickly. The conversation ended, both of them walked away, and the office returned to its usual rhythm. But something about it didn't sit right with him. Not in a jealous way, more like confusion. Because he had been in that same position before, standing, explaining, trying to get a point across. And it never looked like that. People listened, sure, but not like that, not with that level of attention. And the difference wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there. That was the first crack. Small, easy to ignore. But once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. Over the next few days, he began noticing patterns he hadn't paid attention to before. The way certain people spoke in meetings, not longer, just clearer. They didn't fill space with extra words. They got to the point, then stopped. And somehow, that made others lean in instead of tune out. The way some people built connections, it wasn't about knowing more people. It was about how they interacted with the ones they knew. Conversations had direction. There was follow-up. There was intent. It wasn't just passing time between tasks. And then there was the way they worked. Not harder, at least not visibly, but differently. They used tools he had never bothered to explore. Automated things he was still doing manually. Finished tasks faster, not by rushing, but by approaching them from another angle. At first, he tried to dismiss it. Told himself they were just more talented, more confident, maybe even luckier. That explanation felt comfortable. It protected him from having to question himself too deeply. But it didn't hold up for long, because the more he observed, the clearer it became. This wasn't about talent. It wasn't something they were born with. It was something they had learned. That realization didn't hit all at once. It built slowly, like a thought that keeps returning no matter how many times you push it away. Times when he stayed silent because he wasn't sure how to jump in. Times when he worked longer hours just to keep up, while others seemed to move ahead without the same level of effort. And for the first time, he stopped blaming the situation. He stopped blaming timing, management, the system, things that are easy to point at because they're outside. That's when the idea of leverage started to make sense. Not as some abstract concept, but as something practical, real, visible. The difference between pushing harder and using the right tool, between spending more time and creating more impact. He saw it in small examples. A report that used to take him 3 hours, someone else finished it in 1, using a method he didn't even know existed. A presentation that he would have filled with information, someone else simplified into a few key points and somehow made it more convincing. A connection he had treated casually, someone else followed up with intention and turned into an opportunity. None of these things were out of reach. That was the uncomfortable part. They were accessible, learnable, but he hadn't learned them, not because he couldn't, because he didn't realize he needed to. That's when the narrative he had been telling himself started to fall apart. The idea that working hard was enough, that consistency alone would eventually lead somewhere meaningful. It wasn't completely wrong, but it was incomplete. Like having half a map and thinking you understand the whole route. Because effort without direction doesn't multiply, it just repeats. And repeating the same approach over time doesn't create progress, it creates a loop. That realization didn't feel empowering at first. It felt heavy, because it meant the responsibility shifted. It wasn't about waiting for things to change anymore. It was about changing how he approached things. And that's a different kind of challenge. Harder in some ways. Because it requires you to admit that the way you've been operating, maybe for years, isn't enough for where you want to go. He didn't talk about it with anyone, didn't announce it, didn't turn it into some big personal transformation story. On the outside, everything looked the same. Same routine, same office, same tasks. But internally, something had shifted. He was paying attention now, watching how people communicated, not just what they said, but how they structured their thoughts. Noticing how decisions were made, who made them, and why. Observing how tools were used, not as shortcuts, but as extensions of capability. And slowly, a new perspective started to form. One that wasn't based on effort alone, but on effectiveness. He began to see that the workplace, any workplace really, isn't just about completing tasks. It's about solving problems in a way that creates value. And value doesn't come from how long something takes. It comes from how well it's done, how clearly it's communicated, how useful it is to others. That's what gets noticed. That's what moves things forward, and that's what he had been missing. It sounds simple when you say it like that, almost obvious, but living it, that's different, because it requires a shift in how you think, not just what you do. It means slowing down in moments where you're used to rushing, thinking before speaking, structuring ideas instead of just expressing them, building relationships with intention instead of convenience, learning tools that feel uncomfortable at first because they change the way you work. And maybe the hardest part, it means letting go of the comfort that comes from being the hard-working one and stepping into the uncertainty of becoming something else, someone more capable, but also more aware of what they don't know yet. That's not an easy transition. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't feel good all the time. But once you see the difference, really see it, you can't unsee it. And from that point on, going back to the old way of doing things starts to feel off, like wearing shoes that no longer fit, even if you've been using them for years. That's where he found himself, not fully changed, not suddenly ahead of everyone else, just aware, standing in the same place, but looking at it differently. And sometimes, that's the most important shift of all. It didn't turn into some clean, cinematic transformation after that realization. No sudden discipline, no perfectly structured mornings. If anything, it got messier before it got better. Because once you start seeing the gaps in yourself, you can't ignore them anymore. And that awareness follows you into the smallest parts of your day. The way you write a message, the way you respond in a conversation, even the way you sit there, thinking before you speak. It all starts to feel heavier, more deliberate. He still woke up at 6:15, the same alarm, same room, same quiet hum from the refrigerator in the corner. But now, there was a pause after he turned the alarm off. Not the old kind of pause where he tried to gather energy. This one was different. He would sit there for a few seconds longer, staring at nothing in particular, but thinking. Not big thoughts, just small questions. What actually matters today? It sounds simple, almost pointless, but before that, he never asked it. His days used to start with reactions. Now, at least sometimes, they started with intention. Not always. Some mornings he slipped back into the old rhythm, grabbed the phone, checked notifications, let the day pull him along. But even then, he noticed it. That was new. Before, habits ran on autopilot. Now, there was friction. A quiet awareness that said, "You're drifting again." And that awareness, it slowed things down. At work, the changes were subtle, almost invisible if you didn't know what to look for. He didn't suddenly become the most confident speaker in the room. In fact, there were days he spoke less than before. But when he did speak, he tried something different. He paused, just a second, long enough to organize the thought before letting it out. It felt awkward at first, that silence, like standing at the edge of something without knowing if the ground will hold. But then the words came out cleaner, shorter, not perfect, but closer to the point. And something interesting happened. People stopped interrupting as much, not because he demanded attention, but because there was less to interrupt. Fewer unnecessary turns in his sentences, less noise. It wasn't dramatic. No one turned to him like he suddenly became the center of the room. But the small signals were there. A nod that lasted a little longer. A follow-up question instead of a quick, "Okay." That was enough. Enough to tell him he was moving in a different direction. Writing became another quiet battlefield. Emails that used to take 5 minutes now took 15. Not because the content changed, but because he started paying attention to how it was structured. He cut things out, removed words that didn't add anything, tried to make each sentence carry its own weight. Sometimes he'd sit there, reading the same paragraph over and over, adjusting small details no one else would notice. It felt slow, inefficient even. But over time, replies came back clearer, faster, less confusion, less back and forth. It saved time later, even if it cost more in the moment. And that pattern started to repeat in other areas. He began looking at his tasks differently. Not just what needs to be done, but why is this being done this way? That question alone changed things. Some processes he had followed for years didn't make sense anymore when he looked at them closely. Steps that could be skipped, parts that could be automated. Tools he had ignored suddenly became relevant. At first, it was uncomfortable. Learning something new after a long day of work isn't easy. Your mind resists it, tells you to rest, to scroll, to delay it until tomorrow. And sometimes he listened. Some nights, he chose the easier path. Sat there, phone in hand, letting time pass without doing anything meaningful. But even in those moments, something had changed. The comfort wasn't the same anymore. It felt temporary, like he was borrowing time instead of using it. Other nights he pushed through, opened his laptop again, not for work, but for learning. Small things. Watching how others use tools to simplify tasks. Trying them out himself, failing, trying again. No big breakthroughs, just incremental progress. One less manual step here, one faster process there. It didn't look impressive from the outside, but inside, it built something. Confidence. Not loud confidence, not the kind you show off, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing you're becoming more capable, even if no one notices yet. Money became another area he couldn't ignore anymore. Before, it was something he dealt with when necessary. Paycheck comes in, expenses go out, whatever is left stays. No real structure, no real understanding, just a cycle. But once he started paying attention, patterns appeared. Small leaks, subscriptions he forgot about, habits that cost more than he realized. It wasn't about cutting everything out or living strictly. It was about awareness, knowing where things were going. And slowly, that awareness reduced a kind of background stress he didn't even know he was carrying. That feeling when your phone buzzes and you hesitate before checking it, wondering if it's another expense. That hesitation started to fade. Not because he suddenly had more money, but because he had more control. Decision-making, that was harder, slower to change. Because it's not just about knowledge, it's about trust. Trusting your own judgment enough to act. Before, he either rushed decisions just to get them over with, or avoided them until they made themselves. Now, he tried something different. He gave himself space. Not too much, because overthinking is just another trap, but enough to consider the situation clearly. What's the goal? What are the options? What's the likely outcome? Simple questions, but asking them consistently changed the way he moved. He made mistakes. Of course he did. Some decisions didn't work out. Some choices led to extra work, or awkward situations, or small failures that lingered longer than he liked. But even those felt different now. Less like proof that he wasn't capable, more like part of the process. Something to learn from, adjust, move forward. Even his interactions outside of work shifted. Conversations became more intentional. He listened more. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, but actually hearing what the other person was saying. It's a small difference, but people notice it. They respond differently, open up a bit more. Trust builds in quiet ways. And over time, those small changes in behavior started to reflect back at him. Opportunities didn't suddenly flood in. Life doesn't work like that. But small doors opened. A project here, a recommendation there. Someone remembering him for something specific, not just as the reliable guy. It wasn't luck, it was alignment. His skills were starting to match the moments that required them. And maybe the most important change wasn't external at all. It was internal. That constant feeling of being stuck. It softened. Not completely gone, but less dominant, replaced by something else. A sense of movement. Slow, steady, sometimes frustrating, but real. He wasn't where he wanted to be yet, not even close, but he wasn't standing still anymore, and that made a difference. The nights felt different too. That quiet time after everything slowed down. It wasn't as heavy as before. He still thought about his day, still reflected, but now there were small wins to hold on to. Moments where he handled something better, said something clearer, made a decision instead of avoiding it. They weren't big enough to celebrate, but they were enough to notice, enough to build on. And in those quiet moments, sitting there with nothing but his thoughts, he began to understand something that had been missing before. Change doesn't come from one big action. It comes from a series of small, consistent shifts. The way you think, the way you act, the way you respond to the same situations you used to handle differently. It's not dramatic, it's not fast, but it's real. And once it starts, it doesn't stop unless you do. By the time things started to make sense, it didn't feel like a victory. There was no moment where he leaned back, looked at his life and thought, I made it. That kind of ending, it exists more in stories than in real life. What he had instead was something quieter, more grounded, a kind of understanding that settled in slowly, like dust after a long day. He still woke up at the same time, still made his coffee the same way, though now he stirred it a bit longer, almost absent-mindedly, like he wasn't rushing through that part anymore. The apartment was still the same, the job too. From the outside, not much had changed. But if you sat with him long enough, if you watched the way he moved through his day, you'd notice it. Not in big gestures, in small choices. The way he paused before speaking. The way he asked one more question when something didn't make sense. The way he didn't jump at every notification like it was urgent. There was space now, between action and reaction. And in that space, there was control. He no longer felt like the day was dragging him forward. He was walking through it, step by step, aware of where his feet were landing. Not perfect, not always confident, but present. And that presence changed how things unfolded around him. Work didn't feel like a constant pressure anymore. It still had its moments, deadlines, unexpected problems, those days where everything seems to pile up at once. But he handled them differently. Instead of rushing to keep up, he focused on what actually mattered. Not everything deserved his energy. That was something he learned the hard way. Before, he treated every task like it carried the same weight. Now, he saw the difference. Some things move you forward, others just keep you busy. And knowing which is which, that's where the real shift happens. He started saying no more often. Not aggressively, not in a way that burned bridges, just calmly, respectfully. If something didn't align, if it didn't add value, he didn't automatically take it on. That alone changed how people saw him. At first, there was resistance. People are used to you being a certain way. When you change, even slightly, it disrupts their expectations. But over time, something else replaced that resistance. Respect. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in who gets asked for input, in who gets trusted with decisions, in who people turn to when things aren't clear. And slowly, without him chasing it, his role started to shift. Not through a title, through behavior. Outside of work, the changes were even more personal. His relationship with time felt different. Before, time was something that slipped away. Evenings disappeared without him noticing. Weekends blurred together. Now, there was more intention behind how he spent it. Not every hour was productive. Not every moment was planned. But there was awareness. He chose more, scrolled less, built more, avoided less. Even rest felt different. Less like escape, more like recovery. That's an important distinction. When you're constantly escaping, you're running from something. When you're recovering, you're preparing for something. That shift, it changes how you feel when you wake up the next day. His finances didn't magically transform either. There was no sudden windfall, no overnight success. But the anxiety that used to sit in the background, it eased. Not because everything was perfect, but because he understood what was happening. Money stopped being this unpredictable force he reacted to. It became something he managed, slowly, imperfectly, but intentionally. And that sense of control, it carried into other areas of his life. Decision-making, especially. He no longer waited for the right moment as much, because he realized something simple. The right moment rarely announces itself. You either act with the information you have, or you stay still and watch opportunities pass. He chose to act more, not recklessly, just decisively. And when things didn't work out, he adjusted. That became the pattern. Act, learn, adjust, repeat. Over time, that loop replaced the old one of hesitate, overthink, delay. And the difference between those two loops, it's hard to explain until you experience it. One keeps you stuck. The other moves you forward, even if the steps are small. Relationships changed too, not dramatically. He didn't suddenly become more social or outgoing, but the quality of his interactions improved. He listened more carefully, spoke more clearly, followed up when it mattered. And because of that, connections became more meaningful. Not in quantity, in depth. People started to see him differently, not just as someone who gets things done, but as someone who understands what needs to be done. That's a subtle shift, but it carries weight. And maybe the most important change, the one that doesn't show up anywhere but inside, was how he saw himself. Before, there was always that quiet doubt. That feeling of being slightly behind, slightly out of sync, even when everything looked fine on paper. Now, that feeling wasn't gone, but it didn't control him anymore. It became a signal instead of a burden. Something that pointed out where he could improve, not something that defined who he was. He stopped measuring himself only by outcomes, started paying attention to process, to growth, to direction. Because outcomes take time, sometimes longer than you expect. But direction, that's something you choose daily. And once he understood that, patience became easier. Not passive patience, active patience. The kind where you keep moving, even when results aren't immediate. The kind where you trust the process because you've seen small evidence that it works. And here's the thing, none of this is exclusive to him. There's nothing in his story that requires a special background, or a unique opportunity, or some rare talent. It's built on decisions, small ones, repeated consistently. The kind most people overlook because they don't feel significant in the moment. But over time, they stack. They compound. They create a gap between who you were and who you're becoming. And that gap, that's where change lives. So if you're sitting there, somewhere in your own routine, maybe with your own version of that quiet question, why does it feel like I'm not moving forward? Then maybe it's worth looking at things a little differently. Not just how hard you're working, but how you're working. Not just what you're doing, but how you're thinking while you're doing it. Because the truth is, most people don't fail because they lack effort. They stall because they repeat the same approach, hoping for a different result. And that loop, it's comfortable, familiar, easy to justify. But it doesn't take you anywhere new. Breaking out of it doesn't require a complete overhaul of your life. It starts smaller than that. A pause before you speak. A question you ask instead of assuming. A skill you decide to learn, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. A decision you make instead of avoiding. These things don't look impressive, they don't get attention, but they matter, more than most people realize. So maybe the better question isn't about where you are right now. Maybe it's about where your current habits are taking you. Because direction, once set, tends to continue, unless you step in and change it. And if you've stayed with this long enough to hear this part, then maybe you already know something needs to shift. Not everything, just something. One thing, one skill, one pattern, one way of thinking. Start there, see what happens. And if this kind of reflection feels useful to you, if it gives you something to carry into your own day, then you're always welcome to come back. No pressure. Just a space to think a little deeper, move a little clearer, and maybe, over time, build something that actually moves with you, not against you.